Assetto Corsa Competizione version 1.8 is an impossibly large update, so I'm just going to start reeling off a list of some of the highlights. Kunos have added the 2021 GT World Challenge season with all of the entries, liveries, drivers and of course cars, which means the new BMW M4 GT3, which they've added as a free update. On top of that, the physics engine has been uprated to 400Hz, which has garnered improvements across the board, but particularly in various nuanced areas of tyre simulation, suspension and force feedback. And on the graphics side, Nvidia DLSS and AMD FSR have been implemented, providing performance improvements for those with appropriate hardware. And that's all just skimming the surface, so stick with me while I run through ACC version 1.8's greatest hits. It's perhaps fair to say that the BMW M6 wasn't the most popular car in ACC. And while the real car did enjoy a pair of Spa 24-hour wins, it never really enjoyed the success of its rivals from Stuttgart and Ingolstadt either. Add to that BMW winding down their GTE and Formula E programs, placing GT3 at the front of their motorsport lineup, and well, the new GT3 offering from BMW promises to be a very serious machine. If you're looking for a modern, planted, surgical tool that feels absolutely glued to the road in all of the tricky high-speed stuff, then this is very much up your street. And on top of that, it stops well and gets into the corners with more poise than some of the other front-engine machinery in ACC. In short, it feels incredibly capable straight out of the box, and it gives me similar vibes to the first time I drove the Aston Martin. Not necessarily because it feels all that similar, but because you get the impression that it's just going to be extremely popular thanks to its drivability and the ease with which it sticks to the road in all the fast bits. To borrow a word usually reserved for another German automaker's motorsport efforts, it's ominous. If I were feeling charitable, I would describe the initial reaction to the first pictures of the new road-going M4 as mixed. The GT3 version, however, hits a little different, and for me at least, it looks pretty beastly. Though perhaps that's due to the focus being taken away from those nightmarish nostrils by the cunning use of some pretty outrageous body styling. And as you would expect, the team at Kunos have done a wonderful job capturing the beauty of the prototype. It looks stunningly well put together inside and out, and you know what? The more time I spent setting up shots, filming and editing this sequence, the more it's growing on me, characterful nose and all. There's a lot to cover here and it is all pretty technical, so I'll try and stick to the important stuff. Thanks to our old friend optimization, the physics engine has been uprated to run at a higher frequency, 400Hz. And the mission critical parts all run at this frequency as standard now, so that's things like tyres, suspension, springs, dampers, and importantly force feedback as well. While interestingly, other less sensitive functions have been allowed to run at a lower rate to help maintain performance targets. What that means though is that in the real world it's a roughly 20% improvement in those critical areas. Not too shabby. And I feel this is immediately noticeable in the force feedback, but that could easily be a big shaky placebo. But with that in mind, the signal does feel a little smoother and a little sharper in certain details, and in any case, what is clear is that in certain situations, more is probably better. So, where high-frequency events occur, like tyres on curbstones or the behaviour of dampers for example, the engine should, in theory, produce more accurate results. Moving on, the tyre model has had a reworking as well, and promises improved feel and control at and over the grip limit, and that does seem to be the case. It felt immediately obvious in conditions where you were working the tyres hard in two directions at once, for example under traction away from tighter corners and particularly during trail braking. It's difficult to describe exactly what I mean, so to some extent you're going to have to see for yourself, but in essence there seems to be just a little bit more communication during those sort of combined load events, so finessing the car around the grip limit, at least on my equipment, felt better. On the subject of tyres, another big change is a wholesale rewriting of how heat is generated, dissipated and propagated, which is big news since this was one of ACC's strong points to start with, but the new model promises more dynamic changes of behaviour driven by temperature change. And right off the bat, you'll notice that cold tyres feel more nervous than they did before, and they do take longer to bring up to temperature as well. But the trade-off is a better feel when they are up to temperature, and that core temperature, the inner temperature of the tyre, once it's attained, takes longer to dissipate too, which is more realistic. The other headline feature of the updated tyre model is more realistic modelling of surface flash temperatures, or to put it another way, high temperature build-up on the surface of the tyre, which is generally caused by aggressive driving. Overly aggressive driving will now very quickly overheat the surface of the tyre, which will of course propagate into the core as well. And overheated tyres are, well, they're not your friends. So this definitely is a tyre model that will make drivers have to think a little bit harder about how much they're abusing their tyres throughout the stint, in both driving and of course car setup as well. For example, in a couple of instances that I forgot to switch away from the default safe setup when I was testing cars, I found that pushing the car into an understeer situation, which is quite easy to do on those setups, generated a lot more front tyre temperature than it would do in the previous versions. So car and driver really do need to be more in step. Anyhow, the list of physics improvements is genuinely massive, including changes to bump stops, brakes, and on-track grip itself. I've barely scratched the surface here, so I would suggest that reading the changelog is absolutely mandatory. Now, I know that changes of this magnitude can be a cause for concern, but it feels very intuitive once you're in the car, and dare I say it, more natural. And of course, it still feels like ACC, just a little more refined. ACC has been updated to run on Unreal Engine version 4.26.2, which is probably interesting to about 3 of you. For everyone else, there are small incremental visual improvements across the board, and most noticeable is reworked depth of field effects and the introduction of Gen 5 temporal anti-aliasing. But the interesting bit is the implementation of Nvidia DLSS and AMD FSR, which both promise impressive performance gains. While both work in different ways, they are essentially both clever upscalers, which allow the game to run at a lower internal resolution and then get upscaled to the higher screen resolution. DLSS only works with Nvidia's RTX cards, but AMD FSR will work on pretty much anything. I've got an Nvidia 2080 Ti in this rig with a 4K monitor. I'm just going to let the results on screen speak for themselves. I received a similar boost using FSR as well, though obviously this is all setting and hardware dependent, and it's going to take more experimentation before I commit to a final setup, and honestly it's going to be different for you as well. But in any case, I can tell you I will be making use of either DLSS or FSR from now on. The big ticket item is of course the introduction of the 2021 GT World Challenge season with its associated entries, liveries, drivers and BOP. I'm not going to focus on this too much here since all of the cars you've seen in this video have been 2021 cars. Single player has had a sort of sandbox mode added called Open Season that features grid customization, track lineup selection, etc. And quick races and custom weekends have now had this grid mixing feature added as well, opening up more diverse racing possibilities. For example, if you want 4-way multiclass with GT3s, GT4s and the 2 Cup cars, then it's just a few sliders away. They're arranged in class order on the grid and they're treated separately in the timing and results as you would expect. You can also filter between new and older generations of GT3 cars as well, which is nice. Also nice is the tweaked weather system, which has been updated to reduce the predictability of weather patterns. Higher variability settings may now produce fast changes or longer entrenched weather states, or indeed both, within the weekend-long weather simulation. This is another nice step forward in simulation value, though I do know more than a few sim racers who will not be greeting less predictable weather patterns as good news, but that's very much a them problem. ACC version 1.8 should be out later on today, so it won't be long until you can try all of this for yourselves.